How did school change the world? School, as a formal institution, stands among humanity's most consequential inventions. It reshaped how knowledge is shared, how power is organized, how societies cohere, and even how individuals come to understand themselves. Yet, as with many powerful systems, education is never simply a force for liberation. It simultaneously acts as a mechanism of control, a gatekeeper of opportunity, and a source of both possibility and disillusionment. To understand fully how school changed and continues to change the world, we must recognize that its effects arise not inherently from the institution itself, but from the underlying logic that guides human interactions within it. Whether school systems manifest positively or negatively ultimately depends on the beliefs, decisions, and actions of the people who constitute them. At its best, education provides the shared intellectual scaffolding required for diverse groups to live, work, and govern collaboratively. By teaching common languages, histories, and civic norms, schooling allows for the emergence of cohesive identities and peaceful coexistence. Literacy and civic education enable individuals to navigate institutions, fostering mutual understanding and societal stability. Yet the same mechanisms that unify society can also homogenize it. When curricula disproportionately reflect dominant cultural narratives, they erase minority histories, enforce conformity, and silence dissenting perspectives. Thus, the power of education to foster coexistence is conditional, dependent on whether educators and policymakers choose inclusion or conformity, diversity or dominance. The potential for education to unite or marginalize emerges directly from the beliefs and priorities of those who shape it. Educational systems inherently form self-sustaining loops with society. Governments invest in schools, schools produce capable citizens, and these citizens, in turn, support the systems from which education draws strength. Ideally, this reinforcing loop cultivates democratic institutions, economic stability, and societal progress. However, when priorities shift from developing thoughtful citizens to merely producing compliant workers, education instead reinforces rigid status quos. Standardized curricula emphasizing compliance, punctuality, and narrow vocational training may exclude creative, critical, or alternative forms of knowledge as irrelevant or even threatening. Here, the beliefs and actions of educators, policymakers, and communities dictate whether this loop results in dynamic progress or stifling rigidity. Modern institutions, governments, economies, healthcare systems depend fundamentally on a population trained in literacy, reasoning, and collaboration. School acts causally, producing the technical experts and bureaucrats who keep these institutions functioning and advancing society as a whole. Yet, the causal power of school is inherently fragile. When curricula become outdated or disconnected from lived realities, education continues to generate credentials without producing genuine competence. Society is left with a workforce ill-equipped for contemporary challenges and citizens alienated by systems no longer responsive to their needs. Thus, the adaptive capability of education directly reflects whether decision-makers remain attentive to social changes or complacently reproduce obsolete practices. In theory, schools provide ladders of opportunity, allowing individuals from disadvantaged backgrounds to gain social mobility through equitable education. Ideally, the system breaks barriers, enabling meaningful participation across economic and social divides. But in practice, schools often serve as bottlenecks. Students lacking time, resources, or cultural capital frequently face systemic exclusion, where the cycle of inequality perpetuates rather than disrupts itself. Whether education narrows or widens inequality depends explicitly on collective choices: who is given access, how success is defined, and whose interests are prioritized. School thus mirrors the values of society, reflecting not only its aspirations, but also its prejudices. Education integrates individuals into broader economic and civic frameworks, providing tools necessary for meaningful participation in democracy and employment. However, the inclusion provided by school is often narrowly defined, equating success primarily with economic productivity and credentials. Consequently, valuable forms of knowledge and contribution, such as caregiving, volunteerism, or artistic exploration, can fall outside what formal education recognizes or validates. By binding identity to productivity and economic contribution, school reflects society's underlying beliefs about what is valuable, inevitably marginalizing alternative ways of life and knowing. Ideally, educational institutions adapt smoothly to technological advances, shifting economies, and evolving cultural norms, updating curricula and pedagogy accordingly. School can serve as society's stabilizing anchor amid rapid change. However, institutional inertia frequently inhibits adaptation, creating dissonance. When education fails to align with emerging realities, students become aware of a troubling gap between what they learn and what the world demands. Alienation ensues, and school loses relevance. Here, too, the responsiveness of education depends entirely on whether stakeholders choose to embrace or resist change. School profoundly reshapes human cognition, not only transmitting knowledge, but training abstract thought, skepticism, historical awareness, and systems-level reasoning. Formal education transitions humanity from mythic consciousness to analytical literacy and digital fluency. Yet this reshaping is not neutral. By prioritizing certain modes of cognition, education can marginalize embodied, intuitive, ancestral, or communal forms of knowledge. The systems of thought fostered by schools inherently reflect cultural priorities about what kinds of thinking and which individuals are valuable. Whether educational institutions expand or constrain human cognition depends on whose voices shape what is considered valid knowledge. School undeniably changed the world by constructing the cognitive, social, and structural foundations of modernity. Mass cooperation, economic growth, democratic participation, and scientific advancement owe their existence, at least in part, to formal education. However, the same societal systems that education enables, bureaucracies, industrial economies, nation-states, also dictate what education becomes. School is neither neutral nor inevitable. It mirrors society's values, priorities, and prejudices. When aligned with human needs, it produces stability, growth, and opportunity. When misaligned, it generates alienation, inequity, and decline. Ultimately, whether school acts positively or negatively depends on collective beliefs and deliberate human actions. To truly understand education is to recognize it as a reflection of ourselves, a structure simultaneously promising and burdened by history, always capable of transformation, yet not yet fully transformed.